World War II, a time of unimaginable suffering. Over 6 million Jewish men, women, and children were murdered in the Holocaust. But amidst the horror, one woman stood as a beacon of hope. Her name was Irena Sendler, a hero most of the world has never heard of, yet one who saved more lives than entire armies could dream of. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, the world changed forever. The Nazis unleashed their reign of terror, targeting Jewish people with unparalleled brutality. By 1940, they confined nearly 400,000 Jewish men, women, and children into the Warsaw Ghetto, a living nightmare just 1.3 square miles in size. Amidst the rising darkness, a young Polish woman named Irena Sendler refused to stay silent. Born in 1910, Irena grew up in a family that believed in justice and equality. Her father, a doctor, worked tirelessly to treat the poor and sick, including Jewish families. When Irena was just 7 years old, her father passed away after contracting typhus while treating Jewish patients. His dying words to her would shape her entire life. If you see someone drowning, you must jump in to save them, whether you can swim or not. By the time World War II began, Irena was already working as a social worker, helping Poland's poorest communities. She saw firsthand the devastation caused by Nazi policies, especially against Jewish families. When the Warsaw Ghetto was established, Irena made a choice that would change her life and the lives of thousands. She joined the underground resistance, determined to fight back against an evil that seemed unstoppable. But fighting back wasn't simple. The Nazis didn't just rule through fear, they ruled through total control. Every move Irena made came with a price that could cost her her life. Irena began working with a secret organization called Zagota, the Polish Underground Council aiding Jews. She knew the risks, but refused to stand by. And it wasn't just about saving lives, it was about saving hope, humanity, and the future. But how do you fight against a regime capable of such horrors? How do you save lives when the penalty for helping a Jewish person is death? In the Warsaw Ghetto, hope was a luxury. Families lived in unbearable conditions, forced into overcrowded rooms with barely enough food to survive. Every day people disappeared, taken by the Nazis or claimed by starvation and disease. And yet, among the despair, Irena Sendler was a flicker of light, working tirelessly to give life a chance. Irena was one of the few outsiders allowed into the ghetto. As a social worker, she wore a modest coat and carried a worn leather satchel filled with supplies. But the Nazis had no idea what she was really doing. Each visit was a calculated risk. Irena used her position to bring in more than just food or medicine. She smuggled in hope and smuggled out life. How do you save a child when the entire city is watching? Irena didn't just rely on courage. She relied on creativity. Every rescue required careful planning and quick thinking. Some children were carried out in toolboxes, curled up in the tight space with barely enough air to breathe. Others were smuggled in sacks of potatoes or hidden under the floorboards of carts. Irena even disguised infants as laundry, wrapping them tightly and tucking them into baskets of dirty clothes. When all else failed, Irena and her team used the city's underground sewer system, a dark, damp maze where one wrong turn could mean death. The stench was unbearable and the danger constant. But for Irena, there was no price too high to save a life. But rescuing the children was only part of the story. Convincing parents to let them go was another battle altogether. And if you don't let your child leave, they will die here, Irena would tell parents. But how do you say goodbye, knowing it might be forever? Mothers kissed their babies one last time, whispering prayers that they would survive. Fathers handed their sons over with trembling hands, unable to speak. These were not easy decisions, and for Irena, the weight of those goodbyes stayed with her for the rest of her life. Irena knew that these children weren't just statistics. They had names, families, and stories that deserved to be remembered. That's why she created her jars of hope. For every child she rescued, Irena wrote down their real name, their new identity, and the location where they were hidden. She stored these slips of paper in glass jars and buried them beneath a neighbor's apple tree. Her hope was that one day, when the war ended, these children could be reunited with their families. But for many of these children, their families would never return. The jars were more than just a record. They were a testament to the lives that the Nazis tried to erase. Each rescue was a dance with death. The Nazis were relentless, and their checkpoints were everywhere. One mistake could mean execution, not just for Irena, but for the children she was trying to save. By the end of her mission, Irena and her network had rescued over 2,500 children, each one a victory against the Nazis' plans for annihilation. These children found refuge in orphanages, convents, and Polish families who risked their lives to protect them. They were given new names, new homes, and a chance to survive. But the Nazis were not blind. As Irena's operation grew, so did the danger. In 1943, the Gestapo finally caught up with her. What followed was a battle of unimaginable courage and resilience. By 1943, Irena Sendler's operation had saved thousands of Jewish children, but her work didn't go unnoticed. The Nazis were aware that someone was helping Jewish families escape. It was only a matter of time before they found her. In October 1943, the Gestapo arrested Irena Sendler. Her network had been compromised, and her name was betrayed by an informant. She was taken to Pawiak prison, a place notorious for torture and executions. Inside Pawiak prison, Irena faced her captors with unshakable courage. But the Nazis had one goal: to break her and force her to reveal the names of her collaborators and the locations of the rescued children. They beat her mercilessly, breaking her legs and feet in an attempt to force her to talk. The pain was excruciating, but Irena refused to betray the children she had worked so hard to save. Even in the face of death, Irena protected her network. She knew that one word could condemn hundreds of innocent lives, so she stayed silent. After weeks of torture, the Gestapo decided that Irena was no longer useful. She was sentenced to death and scheduled for execution. As she was led to her execution, Irena must have thought this was the end. But fate had other plans. Unbeknownst to Irena, her colleagues from Zegota, the underground organization she worked with, were already in action. They had gathered enough money to bribe a Gestapo officer. The bribe worked. On the day of her execution, Irena's name was mysteriously removed from the death list. The Gestapo announced that she had escaped, but in reality, she was released into the custody of the resistance. Irena Sendler had survived, but the cost of her survival was etched into her body and soul. She could no longer walk without assistance, and the scars of her torture would remain with her forever. Even after her release, Irena refused to stop her mission. From the shadows, she continued coordinating rescues, ensuring that her network remained intact despite the constant threat of exposure. Her physical wounds might have slowed her, but they could not extinguish her spirit. She knew that every second counted and that her work wasn't finished. Even in her moments of doubt, Irena chose to believe in the goodness of people. She understood that fear and desperation could make anyone act against their conscience. But she also knew that the stakes were too high to falter. By the end of the war, Irena had endured more than most could imagine. Her body bore the scars of her defiance, but her spirit remained unbroken. And thanks to her, thousands of children had been given a chance to live. But as the war drew to a close, a new question emerged. Would the children ever be reunited with their families? And would the world ever know the true extent of Irena's bravery? In 1945, as the war ended, Irena Sendler faced a heartbreaking reality. Many of the children she had saved would never be reunited with their families. The Holocaust had taken the lives of over 6 million Jews, including countless parents. Each name represented a child she had rescued, a life she had helped save. But now, those names were all that remained of their families' legacies. Determined to honor her promise to these children, Irena began the arduous task of reconnecting them with any surviving relatives. She worked tirelessly with orphanages and Jewish organizations, hoping to bring closure to shattered families. For Irena, every reunion was a victory, but every child left unclaimed was a reminder of the unimaginable loss the Holocaust had inflicted. She had saved their lives, but she couldn't undo the pain that came with survival. Despite her extraordinary bravery, Irena Sendler did not seek recognition for her actions. For years after the war, her story remained largely unknown, even in Poland. Under the Soviet regime, stories of resistance against the Nazis were often suppressed or distorted. Irena continued her quiet work, helping others in need, never drawing attention to her past. Perhaps it was humility, or perhaps it was the haunting memories of her arrests and torture, but Irena remained silent about her heroism for decades. It wasn't until 1965, when Yad Vashem in Israel honored her as one of the righteous among the nations, that the world began to take notice of Irena Sendler's incredible story. Even then, Irena downplayed her role, saying, "I could have done more. This regret will follow me to my death." But those who knew her understood the depth of her sacrifice. Today, Sendler is remembered as one of history's greatest humanitarians, a woman who risked everything to save the innocent and proved that even in the darkest times, humanity and compassion can prevail. Her story reminds us of the power of courage and kindness. In a world still plagued by injustice and hatred, her legacy challenges us to ask, what would we risk to save another? Let us honor her by standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult, because one person can make a difference, a truth Irena Sendler proved to us all.